When a Greyhound bus breaks down on a quiet North Carolina road, most people sit and wait. Michael Jordan did not wait. He borrowed a stranger's car, got behind the wheel, and drove down a two-lane highway he had never seen before. Alone, no bodyguard, no agent, nobody watching. Just the most famous athlete on the planet and an empty road and a stomach that hadn't eaten since the night before. Then he spotted it. A small diner sitting low against a grassy slope. Warm yellow light in the window. The smell of butter and biscuits drifting all the way out to the gravel lot. He almost kept driving, but he pulled in. He stepped out of the car. He read the big sign above the door. Pearl's Home Cooking. And then he read the smaller sign nailed just below it. Two words. Two words that had no business being on any door in 1991. To two words that should have died decades ago, but had been hanging there so long that the man who owned the diner had stopped seeing them. Michael Jordan stood in that parking lot and read those two words. And then he opened the door and walked in anyway. What happened next, inside that diner, in the next 40 minutes, would follow the owner, a 61-year-old man named Clarence Beaumont, for the rest of his life. It would change the way he saw himself. It would repair something broken between him and his daughter that 2 years of trying had never fixed. It would send him across town with boxes of biscuits to feed people he had spent his whole life pretending didn't exist. It would end with a letter he was too ashamed to write for 4 years, and a package that arrived with no note, no name, but no explanation, just a pair of shoes and a silence that said everything. But there is one more piece to this story, one detail that nobody outside of that small North Carolina town ever heard. A secret that was made just 2 miles down the road at a payphone bolted to the wall of a closed bait shop. And it involves someone Michael Jordan would lose 2 years later in a way that broke him so completely he walked away from basketball entirely. That secret changes the shape of everything. Watch the whole video, because when you find out what Jordan did at that payphone and who he called and what that person said back to him, you will understand that this story was never really about a diner. It was about a son and a father. It in 4 words spoken on a phone line in October 1991 that neither of them knew would be among the last they ever shared. The promise made in the title is true, every single word of it. On a cool Tuesday morning in the fall of 1991, the most famous basketball player on the planet was driving down a 2-lane road in Edgerton, North Carolina. He was not supposed to be there. The Chicago Bulls team bus had broken down 40 miles back, and Michael Jordan had borrowed a car from a local mechanic named Dwayne just to find a working phone. He had no bodyguard with him, no agent, no teammate, just himself, a worn leather jacket, and a quiet stretch of southern highway he had never driven before. He spotted the diner from a quarter-mile away. As it sat low against a grassy slope, a small building with white paint peeling off the shutters and a hand-painted sign above the door that read, Pearl's Home Cooking. A second sign, smaller and older, was nailed just below it. He almost didn't stop. He was tired. He was hungry. His mind was already miles ahead, thinking about practice film, about his shooting percentage from the left block, about what he needed to fix before the next game. But his stomach growled and the diner was right there. And sometimes a man is just a man who needs a meal. He pulled into the gravel lot. Dust rose in a slow cloud around the tires. Through the window he could see warm yellow light inside, the kind of light that means butter melting in a pan and biscuits coming out of the oven golden and hot. He stepped out of the car. He read the big sign first. Our Pearl's Home Cooking. Then he read the smaller sign underneath it. He stood very still. The gravel was quiet under his shoes. A bird called once from somewhere in the tree line. The morning air smelled like pine sap and coming rain. The smaller sign had 2 words on it. 2 words that should not have existed in 1991. 2 words that made the warm yellow light inside the diner look suddenly very cold. He had a choice. He could get back in the red Corvette and drive away. Most people would have. Most people would have told themselves it wasn't their problem, wasn't their fight, wasn't their day to take something like that on. Michael Jordan thought about his father. He thought about something James Jordan had told him once, standing in the driveway back in Wilmington when Michael was still a teenager who thought he knew everything. Tom, the easy thing, his father had said, is to walk away from what's hard. But the thing that stays with people, the thing they carry with them forever, is when somebody chooses to stay. Michael Jordan looked at the sign one more time. Then he opened the door and walked in. What happened in the next 40 minutes would follow a man named Clarence Beaumont for the rest of his life, and in the end it would save it. But there is one more thing about that morning. One detail that nobody outside of Edgerton ever heard. A secret that turns the whole story on its head. The man behind the counter was named Clarence Beaumont, and he was 61 years old, and he had not slept well in years. He ran Pearl's home cooking the same way he had always run it. Alone, early, quiet. He was at the grill by 5 every morning. He cracked eggs the same way his mother had taught him. One hand, sharp tap against the edge of the pan, clean break. He made the biscuit dough by feel, not by measuring. The recipe lived in his hands, not on paper. Pearl Beaumont, his mother, had opened this diner in 1959. She had come from Georgia on a Greyhound bus with $200, a cast iron skillet, and a stubbornness that could bend railroad iron. She had built the whole place herself. The counter, the booths, the shelves on the wall where she kept her good plates. She had painted the big sign above the door with a brush she bought at the 5 and Dime. She had also painted the smaller sign, the one below it, the one with 2 words. In 1959, in Edgerton, North Carolina, that sign was not unusual. It fit the time like a bad tooth fits a jaw, painfully, permanently, so deep that pulling it out seems like more trouble than leaving it. But the time had changed. The laws had changed. The Civil Rights Act had been signed before Clarence was old enough to shave. And still, the sign had stayed. Not because Clarence was a cruel man. He would have told you that honestly, and he would have believed it. He had never raised his fist at anyone. He had never shouted a hard word across a parking lot. He thought of himself as a quiet man who kept to himself and ran a clean diner. The sign had stayed because he had never really looked at it. Not truly. It was just there. The way the tin roof was there. The way the jukebox in the corner was there. The way the smell of frying bacon and old wood was always there. It was part of the place. It was what his mother had built. And his mother was gone. And the diner was all he had left of her. His daughter Rosie had asked him twice to take it down. Once when she was 16, once when she was 18. Both times Clarence had told her the same thing. It wasn't hurting anybody. Both times Rosie had gone very quiet in a way that told him she disagreed completely but had run out of ways to say it. Rosie was 19 now, away at community college 30 miles down the road, studying to be a nurse. She was not at the diner that Tuesday morning. It was just Clarence and his waitress Fern, who had worked there 18 years and had long stopped seeing the sign at all. The bell above the door rang at 8:47 in the morning. Clarence looked up from the grill. The man who walked through the door was 6 feet 6 inches tall, with shoulders that filled the frame and a face that Clarence knew immediately. He knew that face the way everyone in America knew that face. From television, from posters, from the front page of every sports magazine. Michael Jordan stood just inside the door of Pearl's home cooking and looked at Clarence Beaumont. Clarence felt something move through his chest that he could not name. It was not anger. It was not surprise exactly. It was something closer to dread, like the moment just before something falls and you know you cannot catch it. Jordan did not point at the sign. He did not raise his voice. He did not pull out a camera or wave a fist or say a single hard word. He walked to the counter, pulled out a stool, sat down and said quietly, "I'd like some eggs." Please." And somehow, in a way Clarence could not explain then and could barely explain years later, those 5 simple words were the most terrifying thing he had ever heard in his life. Because they did not ask him to be ashamed. They just gave him the chance to choose. Fern Atwater was 55 years old and had worked at Pearl's for 18 years and thought of herself as a person who did not get rattled. She had outlasted 3 different fry cooks, a kitchen fire that took out the back wall in 1987, and the death of her husband Roy, who had left her with 2 boys to raise and a mortgage she paid off 1 slow month at a time. She had handled every difficult customer, every dropped plate, every early morning when the coffee machine would not start and her feet ached before she had even tied her apron strings. Fern did not rattle. That was just who she was. Until the bell above the door rang at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning, and she looked up from the counter she was wiping down, and Michael Jordan walked in. Fern's hand stopped moving. The rag sat wet and still on the counter. She watched Jordan walk to the nearest stool and sit down like a man who had been driving all morning and was glad to be off his feet. He did not look around the room the way famous people sometimes do, checking to see who was watching. He just sat. He set his jacket on the stool beside him. He looked at the menu board on the wall. Fern looked at Clarence. Clarence was looking at the grill. Neither of them spoke. The diner was so quiet that Fern could hear the faint sound of grease popping in the pan and the tick of the old clock above the door. Jordan looked up from the menu and found Fern's eyes. He had warm eyes. That was the detail she would go back to again and again when she told the story later. On the phone to her son Danny that night, her voice cracking in a way that surprised her, and to her neighbor Claudette the next morning over the fence. She would say he had the warmest eyes she had ever seen on a man who had every right in the world to be angry. "Coffee would be wonderful," he said, "if it's not too much trouble." Fern's hands moved before her brain caught up with them. That was the only way she could explain it afterward. Her hands just knew what to do. She reached for the coffee pot. She lifted it. She crossed to the counter and set a mug down in front of him and poured. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. She was not afraid of the man. From something else. Something that started low in her stomach and moved up slow, like a fever coming on. She would not have a word for it until 3 days later, when she was sitting in church and the pastor said something about the weight we carry without knowing we're carrying it. Shame. That was the word. The slow, quiet, long overdue kind. Jordan wrapped both hands around the mug the way you do when something is warm and you have been cold for a while. He looked at the coffee. Then he looked up at the menu board again. "The biscuits and gravy," he said, "and 2 eggs over easy. That all right?" "Yes, sir," Fern heard herself say. She had never in her life called a black man sir. Not once, not ever. The word came out on its own, and it felt right in a way that frightened her a little. Because if it felt right now, Ma, what did that say about all the years it hadn't happened? She went to the kitchen, passed through, and leaned close to Clarence. Her voice was barely a whisper. "What do we do?" she asked. Clarence was still looking at the wall above the stove. He stood with the spatula in his hand and said nothing for a long time. The grill ticked. Outside, a truck rolled slowly past on the road. Then he said 4 words. "We make his food." It was not the answer Fern expected, but standing there in the kitchen doorway with the coffee pot still warm in her hand, she understood that it was exactly the right one. She went back to the counter. Jordan was looking out the window at the gravel lot, at his red Corvette sitting in the morning sun. He looked calm, patient, like a man who had made a decision and was now simply living inside it without apology. Behind the pass-through, Clarence cracked 2 eggs on the flat iron grill. The sound filled the whole diner, and something that had been stuck for a very long time, quietly began to move. Clarence carried the plate out himself. He could have let Fern do it. That was her job, but something in him needed to be the one to set the food down. He could not have said exactly why. He just knew that if he stayed hidden behind the grill while this man sat alone at his counter, he would not be able to live with it the same way he had been living with the sign, by not looking directly at it. He came through the pass-through and crossed the floor and set the plate down in front of Michael Jordan. The biscuits were golden. The gravy was thick and dark. The eggs were exactly over easy, the yolks still soft, the whites set clean. Jordan looked at the plate. Then he looked up at Clarence. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," Clarence said. That was all, just those 4 words between them, but something in the weight of them, the way they landed, the way neither man looked away, made the whole diner feel smaller and more honest than it ever had before. Jordan picked up his fork. He ate the way a hungry man eats, not slowly to make a point, not loudly to fill the silence, but steadily and with focus, the way someone eats when the food is genuinely good and they are genuinely glad to have it. He was halfway through the biscuits when he stopped and looked up. "These," he said, "are the best biscuits I've had since my grandmother's." Clarence blinked. He had not expected that. He had been braced for anger, for a speech, for a camera phone. Those cell phones barely existed yet, and most people didn't have one. He had been braced for something hard. He had not been braced for a compliment. "My mother's recipe," Clarence said. "She's still around?" Jordan asked. "No, she passed in '84. "Mine too," Jordan said. "'89. 2 words, "mine too." That was the crack in the wall between them, small as a hairline split in old plaster. But once a crack opens, light comes through whether you want it to or not. They talked about their mothers. It started slowly, the way a fire starts from a single match, carefully with a lot of air around it. Clarence talked about Pearl. He talked about her hands, rough and sure, the way she could press biscuit dough flat in 3 strokes and have it perfect every time. He talked about the cast iron skillet she carried on the Greyhound bus from Georgia. He talked about the way she hummed old gospel songs while she cooked. Never the whole song, just the same handful of bars, over and over, like a needle stuck in a groove she didn't mind being stuck in. Jordan talked about his grandmother's kitchen in Teachey, North Carolina, not 2 hours from where they were sitting right now. He talked about Sunday mornings and the smell of cornbread and the sound of the radio playing through a screen door. He talked about the way his grandmother never measured anything. She just knew. Her hands knew. Clarence looked at Jordan. Jordan looked at Clarence. They were both from North Carolina. They had both lost a woman who cooked for them with love. Their hands had both learned things from women who were gone now. And the distance between them, which had felt 20 minutes ago as wide as the whole broken history of this country, had narrowed down to something almost crossable. Neither of them said any of that out loud. They didn't need to. Then Jordan set his fork down, quietly. He looked at Clarence with a steadiness that Clarence could not turn away from, and he asked the question no one had ever asked before. Not, "Why is that sign still up?" Not, "Don't you know it's wrong?" "Do you believe in it?" Jordan asked. "The sign? Do you actually believe in what it says?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Clarence felt the ripples move all the way through him. No one had ever asked him that. Rosie had told him the sign was wrong. The law had told him the sign was wrong. But no one had ever just looked at him and asked whether he, Clarence Beaumont, in his own heart, actually believed in the thing hanging above his mother's door. He opened his mouth. He meant to explain. He meant to say something about tradition, about his mother, about how the sign was old and he had never really thought much about it. All of that sat ready on his tongue. What came out instead was the truth. "No," Clarence said. "I don't think I ever did." Jordan looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were steady and warm and completely without cruelty. Then he picked his fork back up and cut into the last biscuit. "Then you ought to take it down," he said simply, and he went back to his eggs. Clarence stood at the counter and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Every excuse he had ever rehearsed, every wall he had built around the thing he had refused to look at, had just come down in 4 words spoken so quietly they barely stirred the air. "Then you ought to take it down." Simple as that, gentle as that, final as that. When Jordan finished eating, he set his fork down on the empty plate and sat quietly for a moment the way a person does after a meal that was better than expected. Then he reached inside his leather jacket and pulled out his wallet. He opened it and laid 2 $20 bills flat on the counter, side by side, smoothed out with his palm the way you smooth a letter before you fold it. The meal had cost $6.50. "Keep it," he said. Fern, watching from near the coffee station, thought that was the end of it. She thought Jordan would stand up. Will he pull on his jacket, shake Clarence's hand maybe, and walk out to his red Corvette and drive back into the world that belonged to him, the world of arenas and championship rings, and his face on every billboard from here to Charlotte. She was wrong. Jordan stayed on his stool. He looked at the counter for a moment. Then he looked up at Clarence, and his voice was the same as it had been all morning, low and even and without any edge to it. "Do you have a hammer?" he asked. "And maybe a flathead screwdriver?" Clarence stared at him. Of all the things he had imagined this man might say or do, this was not anywhere on the list. He stood behind the counter with his mouth open slightly and his brain working slowly, like an engine trying to turn over on a cold morning. "A hammer," Clarence repeated. "If you have one," Jordan said. Clarence went to the back room. He moved slowly, the way people move when they are doing something their body understands before their mind is caught up. He came back with a hammer in one hand and a flathead screwdriver in the other, and held them out over the counter like a man who was not entirely sure what he was handing over or why. Jordan took them. He stood up from the stool. He walked to the front door, pushed it open, and stepped out onto the small wooden porch. Fern did not breathe. Clarence followed him to the doorway and stood there with one hand on the frame, watching. Jordan stood in front of the smaller sign. He read it one more time. Then he turned and looked back at Clarence standing in the doorway, and he held out the hammer and screwdriver, handle first. "You want to do this yourself?" Jordan said. "It should be you. It ought to come down by your hand, not mine." Clarence looked at the tools. He looked at the sign. He looked at Jordan's face, which held no judgment in it, only a kind of patient waiting, the way you wait for someone to find something they already know is there. He stepped out onto the porch. His hands were trembling, not from cold. The morning was warm and getting warmer. They were trembling from something that had been building in him since 8:47 that morning. Something he had no name for yet, but that felt like a door opening inside his chest that had been shut for 32 years. He took the screwdriver. He pressed the flat blade under the corner of the sign, right where the first nail went in. He leaned into it. The nail gave, then the second, then the third. So the sign came off the wall with a sound like a long breath finally let go. Clarence held it in both hands. It was smaller than he remembered, 12 inches wide, maybe 8 inches tall. White paint with black letters peeling at the edges. His mother had painted it with a brush from the 5 and dime. He had watched her do it when he was a boy. He had thought nothing of it then. He had been a boy, and it had been 1959, and it had seemed as ordinary as the roof and the shelves and the smell of frying bacon. He stood on the porch holding it for a long moment. Jordan stood beside him and said nothing. A mockingbird sang from the tree line behind the parking lot. The red Corvette sat in the gravel, bright in the morning sun. Clarence walked to the trash can at the corner of the porch and dropped the sign in. It made a hollow, a final sound at the bottom of the empty can. He turned back to Jordan. Two men on a wooden porch in North Carolina, the October air warm around them. Nothing between them now but space and morning light. "Thank you for breakfast," Jordan said. "Thank you for stopping," Clarence said. They shook hands. Jordan walked to his car, got in, and drove away down the 2-lane road. Clarence watched until the red car disappeared around the far bend, and the sound of the engine faded into birdsong and wind. Then he sat down on the wooden porch steps, and he cried. He had not cried since his mother's funeral in 1984. He had thought he was past it, past the kind of crying that comes up from somewhere so deep you don't even feel it building until it's already out of you. He cried for Pearl. He cried for the people who had read those 2 words above his door for 32 years and felt something in their chest that they never should have had to feel. He cried because a man who had every reason in the world to walk away had instead sat down, eaten biscuits, talked about his grandmother, and handed him a screwdriver. He cried because grace, when it finally arrives, can feel a whole lot like grief. Fern called Rosie at 11 o'clock that morning, during the break between her first and second classes. Fern was not a natural storyteller. She started in the middle and jumped to the end and left out important parts and then circled back to fill them in, so that listening to Fern tell a story was a little like watching someone put together a puzzle by dumping all the pieces at once and working from the corners inward. But the important part came through clearly enough, even through the scramble. "Michael Jordan came in this morning," Fern said, "and your daddy took the sign down." Rosie was sitting on a bench outside the science building with her nursing textbook open in her lap. She closed it. She sat very still. She did not speak for so long that Fern said, "Hello? You still there, sweetheart?" "I'm here," Rosie said. She was 19 years old. For 3 years, she had been trying to do 2 things at the same time that do not go easily together: love her father completely and be ashamed of him. She had managed it the way you manage something that has no good solution, imperfectly, painfully, with a lot of quiet held inside. She had asked him twice to take the sign down. Twice he had said it wasn't hurting anybody. Both times she had gone quiet, not because she believed him, but because she had run all the way to the end of her words and found nothing left on the other side of them. She had prayed about it. She had cried about it alone in her dorm room. She had told her roommate, a girl named Adaz from Raleigh, and Adaz had listened with the careful, serious attention of someone who understood exactly what that kind of sign meant and had said only, "I'm sorry you're carrying that." And now Fern was on the phone telling her it was gone, that Michael Jordan had walked in and eaten biscuits and talked to her father like a human being, and her father had taken the sign down with his own 2 hands. Rosie skipped her 3 o'clock class. She drove the 30 miles home with the windows down and the radio off. It's just the wind and her own thoughts in the flat green landscape of North Carolina sliding past. She walked into Pearl's through the front door. The diner smelled the way it always smelled. Bacon, fat, and old wood, and the faint sweetness of biscuit dough. Fern was wiping down the counter. A couple of regulars sat in the far booth, drinking coffee and not talking much. Rosie looked above the door. The big sign was still there. Pearl's Home Cooking, hand-lettered by her grandmother 42 years ago. But the small sign below it was gone. In its place were 2 small nail holes in the old wood, open and honest as a confession. Clarence came out of the kitchen. He saw Rosie. He stopped. He looked like a man who had put something heavy down and wasn't sure yet how to stand without the weight of it. Lighter in one way, unsteady in another. Rosie walked around the counter. She put her arms around her father and held on. He held her back. Tight, the way you hold someone. When you know you wasted time you cannot get back. "I'm sorry, baby," he said quietly into her hair. "I'm real sorry." She did not say, "It's okay," because it had not been okay. 3 years of carrying shame for someone else's blindness is not okay, and they both knew it, and saying otherwise would have been a kindness that cost too much. Instead, she said the truest thing she had. "I know, Daddy," she said. "I know you are." That evening, after the diner closed, Clarence went out to the porch with a small can of paint and a thin brush. He filled in the 2 nail holes. Then, without planning to, without sketching at first, he painted a small red rose in the wood beside them. One he had not painted anything since he was a boy. His hands were not steady. The rose was not perfect, but it was alive in a way the sign had never been. Edgerton was not a large town. It had 1 stoplight, 2 churches, a dollar store, a feed supply on the south end, and a gas station where the pump on the left side had been broken since 1988 and nobody had fixed it. A town that size does not keep secrets. It was not built for them. By Wednesday morning, less than 24 hours after Michael Jordan had driven away in his red Corvette, most people in Edgerton knew he had stopped at Pearl's. By Wednesday afternoon, most people knew about the sign. The town cracked down the middle the way small towns always do when something true and uncomfortable rises to the surface. Not violently, not loudly, just quietly, hidden the way a piece of old wood splits along a grain that was always there, waiting for the right pressure. Some people came to Pearl's that week who had never set foot in it before. They drove in from Mill Haven and Creedmoor, and one family from as far as Durham, just to see the place. They sat at the counter and ordered coffee and looked at the small red rose painted above the door and did not say much. They tipped well and left quietly, which felt like its own kind of message. Some of the old regulars did not come. A man named Gerald Pruitt, who had eaten breakfast at Pearl's every Thursday for 15 years without missing a single one, stayed away for 2 full weeks. Fern noticed. Clarence noticed. Neither of them said anything about it. Then on the 3rd Thursday, the bell above the door rang at 7:15 in the morning. And Gerald Pruitt walked in. He was a heavy-set man in his late 60s with a gray mustache and a John Deere cap he wore indoors and out. He walked to his regular stool at the far end of the counter, the same stool he had sat on every Thursday for 15 years, and he sat down. Fern came over with the coffee pot before he even had his jacket off. She filled his mug without being asked, the way she had done 400 Thursdays before this one. Gerald wrapped his hands around the mug. He looked down the counter. He looked at the wall above the door where the red rose now sat in the wood beside the 2 filled nail holes. He looked at it for a long time, the way a man looks at something he is trying to make up his mind about. Finally, he spoke. "Fern," he said. "Yeah. Gerald. Eggs and bacon. Coming right up. That was the whole conversation. 4 lines. But Gerald came back the next Thursday, and the one after that, and every single Thursday for the rest of the time, Pearl's was open. He never mentioned the sign. He never mentioned Michael Jordan. He just came back and sat on his stool and drank his coffee and ate his eggs. A reporter from a Charlotte newspaper drove out that week looking for a story. Clarence met her at the door and said politely that it was a private matter and he had nothing to say to the press. The reporter asked if she could get a comment from Michael Jordan. Clarence said he did not have the man's phone number and would not give it out even if he did. The reporter went away without her story. Jordan never spoke publicly about that Tuesday morning. Not in any interview, not in any press conference, not in any of the books written about his life. In every account of the 1991 championship season, there is no mention of a diner in Edgerton, a sign, a hammer, a screwdriver, or a man named Clarence Beaumont sitting on a wooden porch and crying. He had done it for Clarence, not for the cameras, not for the story. And Rosie thought, when she learned this later, that it was the most important part of the whole thing. Because the truest kindness is the kind that never asks to be remembered. The change in Clarence Beaumont did not happen all at once. It came the way spring comes to North Carolina. Not in a single warm day, but in a slow, uneven turning. Some mornings cold still, and some already carrying the smell of something green pushing up through the dirt. Well, you don't notice it happening until one morning you step outside and realize that the world has quietly become different while you were looking at other things. For the first month after the sign came down, Clarence mostly just ran the diner. He got up at 5. He cracked his eggs. He made his biscuits by feel. He opened at 7 and closed at 2 and went home and sat in the same chair he always sat in and watched the same evening news he always watched. But something was different inside the sameness. He was looking now, really looking, in a way he had not done in a long time, at the world just outside the edges of his own life. In the spring of 1992, he drove to the south side of Edgerton. It was a part of town he had not visited in years. Not because he had been told to stay away. No one had ever said that, and he had just never had a reason to go, and so he never went. And the distance between his diner on the north end and the streets on the south end had grown year by year into something that felt, without anyone planning it that way, like a wall. He had heard about the meal program through Fern, who had heard about it from her neighbor who went every week. A man named Reverend Otis Drummond ran it out of the fellowship hall at Second Baptist Church, a free Thursday meal for anyone in the community who needed one. It had been running for 6 years. Clarence had never known it existed. He pulled into the church parking lot with a cardboard box on the passenger seat. Inside the box were 60 biscuits, still warm from the oven, wrapped in dish towels to hold the heat. He knocked on the side door of the fellowship hall, when a tall man with a white beard and a voice like the lowest note on a pipe organ opened it. He looked at Clarence. He looked at the box. He had heard what happened at Pearl's. "What can I do for you?" Reverend Drummond asked. "Nothing," Clarence said. "I brought food." "I can see that," Drummond said. "Why?" Clarence thought about it honestly, the way he had been trying to think about things since October. He said, "Because somebody was decent to me when he had no reason to be. And I figure I owe some decency to somebody else." Drummond looked at him for a long, measuring moment. The kind of look that takes the full weight of a person and decides what it thinks. Then he stepped back from the doorway. "Come on in then," he said. Clarence started coming every other Thursday. Biscuits usually. Sometimes a pot of his mother's bean stew, the recipe he had always kept only in his hands. He did not make a production of it. He showed up, set the food out, helped serve, and drove home. He did not want a thank you speech. He did not want his name on anything. But he stayed long enough to learn names. He learned that the big man who always asked for 2 biscuits instead of 1 was named Theodore, and had worked 30 years at a textile mill that closed in 1989 and taken everything with it when it went. He learned that the quiet woman who always sat by the window in the yellow coat was named Mavis, and was raising 3 grandchildren on her own after her daughter got sick. He learned what he should have known all his life, that the people on the other side of that sign had always just been people. People with names and stories and hands that got cold in winter and children they worried about at night. 3 years after the sign came down, Clarence hired a young man named Marcus Webb, 22 years old, newly arrived in Edgerton from Raleigh, who needed work and knew his way around a kitchen. Marcus was black. He became the finest fry cook Pearls had ever had. Fern trained him on the biscuit recipe herself. She had never taught it to anyone before. She did not do it because Clarence asked her to. She did it because Marcus was patient and eager and stood at the counter with flour on his hands and a look on his face like someone being handed something precious, which Fern thought was exactly right, because it was. In the summer of 1995, Clarence Beaumont sat down at his kitchen table on a Sunday evening with a legal pad, a ballpoint pen, and a bowl of peach ice cream that went soft and then liquid while he sat there trying to find the right first word. He had been thinking about writing this letter for 4 years. He had started it twice before. The first time he got 3 sentences in and threw the page away. The second time he got further, a full paragraph, before the words turned into something that sounded more like an excuse than an apology, and he crumpled that one too and dropped it in the trash without reading it back. But Rosie was graduating from nursing school in 2 weeks, and Reverend Drummond had said something at Thursday's meal that had been sitting in Clarence's chest ever since, like a key looking for a lock. Drummond had said, "Sometimes healing only becomes complete when you say out loud what happened, not to explain it, not to justify it, just to say, this is what was, and this is what I did about it, and I am telling you so that it is real." So Clarence wrote. He wrote about the sign. He wrote about his mother and the Greyhound bus and the cast iron skillet. He wrote about Rosie asking him twice and him saying it wasn't hurting anybody. He wrote about the morning in October 1991 when the most famous athlete in the world had walked into his diner alone and sat at the counter and asked for eggs, and had talked with him about grandmothers in North Carolina kitchens and the way the people we love teach our hands things that stay long after they are gone. He wrote about the hammer and the screwdriver. He wrote about the sound the sign made when it hit the bottom of the trash can. Oh, he wrote about Rosie coming home, and the red rose on the porch, and Reverend Drummond's fellowship hall, and Theodore and Mavis, and Marcus standing at the counter with flour on his hands. Then he wrote the part that had taken him 4 years to be ready to say. He wrote, "I am not writing this to make myself feel better or to ask for something I have not earned. I know that the sign above my door caused pain to people I will never meet and cannot reach. I am writing because your kindness that morning was the thing that cracked me open. You could have walked in with anger, and I would have deserved every bit of it. Instead, you sat down and treated me like a man worth talking to. I did not deserve that, but you gave it anyway, and it saved me. Not just from that sign, from the kind of person I was becoming by not seeing it." He signed his name. It's Clarence Beaumont, Pearls Home Cooking, Edgerton, North Carolina. He mailed it to the Chicago Bulls organization because he had no other address. He did not know if anyone would read it. He did not know if it would sit unopened in a mailroom pile and eventually be thrown away. He sealed the envelope and walked to the mailbox at the end of his street and let it go, and stood there a moment with his hands still raised, like a man releasing a bird he is not sure will fly. 4 months passed. Then a small package arrived at Pearl's Home Cooking, addressed by hand in careful block letters. Inside was a pair of Air Jordan sneakers, women's size 8, brand new in the box, with the tissue paper still pressed around them. Clarence had mentioned in the letter that Rosie was graduating nursing school. He had not asked for anything. He had not expected anything. There was no note inside the box, no card, no signature, just the shoes. Rosie wore them to her graduation ceremony 2 weeks later. She walked across that stage in a white nursing uniform and a pair of Air Jordans. And when she got to the other side and shook the dean's hand and turned to find her father in the crowd, Clarence was on his feet. He had been crying since she crossed the halfway point. He did not try to stop. Here is what we held back. From the very first chapter, when Michael Jordan pulled into the gravel lot of Pearl's Home Cooking and read the sign above the door, there has been one detail that nobody outside of Edgerton ever learned. One piece of the story that changes the shape of everything that came before it. This is that piece. And when Jordan left the diner that Tuesday morning and got into the red Corvette and drove away, he did not immediately go looking for a working phone to call his team. He drove 2 miles down the road to a payphone, bolted to the outside wall of a closed bait shop. He pulled over. He got out. He fed quarters into the slot, and he made a call, not to his coach, not to his agent, not to anyone connected to the Chicago Bulls or the championship season, bearing down on all of them like a freight train. He called his father. James Jordan answered on the third ring, the way he usually did, in a voice that was warm and unhurried, the voice of a man who was always genuinely glad when his son called. Michael stood at that payphone on a North Carolina roadside with the October sun on his face and told his father everything. The broken-down bus, the borrowed Corvette, the two-lane road, the diner sitting low against the grassy slope with the yellow light inside. He told him about the sign. He told him about Clarence and Fern and the coffee and the biscuits that tasted like his grandmother's. He told him about two men from North Carolina talking about women who cooked for them with love and hands that knew things that couldn't be written down. He told him about asking for the hammer, about handing it back and saying, "It should be you," about the sound the sign made dropping into the empty trash can, about Clarence sitting on the porch steps after the red car drove away. James Jordan listened to all of it without interrupting once. When Michael finished, the line was quiet for a moment. Just the sound of the open North Carolina air on both ends of the phone. Father and son, 2 miles and 40 miles apart, connected by a wire and 30 years of everything a father tries to give a son before the world gets too loud for the lessons to land. Then James Jordan said 4 words. "That's my boy," he said. Michael Jordan stood at the payphone with those 4 words in his chest and did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the sky above the tree line. He looked at the empty road. He thought about the diner and the man on the porch steps and the small red rose that would be painted there by nightfall, though he would never know about that part. He thought about how his father had told him once, standing in a driveway in Wilmington when Michael was still a teenager. The easy thing is to walk away from what's hard, but the thing that stays with people is when somebody chooses to stay. He had stayed, and now his father knew. James Jordan was murdered on July 23rd, 1993. He was shot on the side of a highway in Robeson County, North Carolina, while he slept in his car. He was 56 years old. Michael Jordan retired from basketball that October, and people who knew him well said the grief had taken something out of him that no championship ring could put back. The call from the bait shop payphone that October morning in 1991 was one of the last times Michael Jordan told his father a story and heard those 4 words come back. "That's my boy." He has never spoken publicly about that morning in Edgerton. He has never mentioned Clarence Beaumont or Pearl's home cooking or the sign or the hammer or the payphone 2 miles down the road. Some kindnesses are so private and so complete that putting them into words for a crowd would shrink them down to something smaller than they actually are. But Clarence carried it. Rosie carried it. Fern carried it. Reverend Drummond and Theodore and Mavis and Marcus. All of them carried some piece of what that morning set in motion, the way a stone dropped in still water sends rings outward long after the stone has settled to the bottom. Rosie Beaumont became a nurse and worked for 30 years in the same county where she grew up. She raised a daughter. She named her Pearl. Pearl Beaumont Harris grew up hearing the story the way all the most important family stories are told, at kitchen tables and in cars on long drives and late at night when someone asked the right question at the right moment. When Pearl was old enough to ask her mother what the most important thing she knew was, Rosie always answered the same way. She did not say, "Be kind." She did not say, "Work hard." She did not say, "Love your family." She said this: somebody choosing to stay when walking away would have been so much easier, so much safer, so much less trouble, can change everything. It can change a man. It can change a family. It can change the way a whole town sees itself. And sometimes, Rosie would say, her voice dropping just slightly the way it always did at this part, the bravest thing in the whole wide world is sitting down at a counter and asking for eggs. Pearl's home cooking is still open. Marcus Webb, the young man Clarence hired in 1994, now co-owns the diner with Rosie. They renovated it twice. On the cast iron skillet Pearl Beaumont carried on a Greyhound bus from Georgia in 1959 still hangs on the wall behind the counter, black and heavy and older than most of the people who eat beneath it. The biscuit recipe has never been written down. You have to learn it by standing at the counter and watching and asking questions and getting it wrong and trying again, which, when you think about it, is how most of the important things in life are learned. Clarence Beaumont died in 2018 at the age of 88. At his funeral, Reverend Drummond, older now and slower but with the same deep voice, told the story of the October morning when a famous man drove a red car down a two-lane road and stopped for breakfast. Clarence Beaumont was not a bad man who became a good man, Drummond said. He was a man who had something blocking his view. And when the view finally cleared, he looked. He really looked. And then he got up and did something about it. That is all any of us are ever called to do. The small red rose above the door of Pearl's home cooking is still there, painted fresh every spring. And that is the story of the morning Michael Jordan chose to stay. A broken down bus, a two-lane road, a diner with a sign that should have come down decades before it did. And one man who walked through the door anyway, sat at the counter, asked for eggs, and treated a stranger like a human being worth talking to. He didn't make a speech. He didn't call a camera crew. He didn't post about it. He just did the right thing, quietly, completely, and then drove away. Clarence Beaumont spent the rest of his life trying to be worthy of that morning, and I think in the end he was. And before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us, where in the world are you watching this from? We have people tuning in from places that never stop surprising us, and we want to hear from you. If this story moved you even a little, if it made you think about the doors you walk through and the choices you make when nobody's watching, hit that like button. It takes 1 second and it helps this story reach someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe that kindness is worth spreading, that one person choosing to stay can change everything, then subscribe to this channel. Every week we bring you stories that prove that ordinary people do extraordinary things, and we never want you to miss one. Now click on the video on your screen right now. The next story is already waiting. And something tells us it is going to stay with you just as long as this one did.